Well, welcome and good evening. My name is Corinne DeBray, and I'm Managing Director at the Foster, and it's my great pleasure to be introducing another, in this case, more than one, a set of guest artist explorer speakers here tonight as part of our monthly series. And tonight I'm very pleased to introduce not one again, but two guest artist explorers. Judy Irving, who's an Emmy Award-winning filmmaker and perhaps best known for her film The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill, and most recently Pelican Dreams, among many other short, wonderful films, some of whom you may have seen on KQED. Judy has also contributed to many beautiful photographs over the years that have graced magazine covers, websites. One of my favorites is of a salt marsh harvest mouse that appeared on, I think it was at least Bay Nature magazine, and I can't think of a few other places too. I myself have never seen one, but I feel like I vicariously could get a thrill every time I look at one of those photos. Both Judy and Mark Bittner, who is here to present with her, reside on Telegraph Hill in San Francisco, and with two education parrots. Is that correct if I say that? Rescue parrots. And so, who I've had the pleasure to see and to meet briefly. So we're fortunate to have them both up here this month. This is a special night with both artist explorers previewing their works, and some of which are also collaborations between the two of them. So I think it's a wonderful evening. Just last Saturday, for example, Mark Bittner, who will be presenting first, finished a book that he's been working on for 12 and a half years. So that's a big deal. Woohoo! And, so I think we deserve some applause just for that. And then to accompany the book, called Street Song, Mark decided to record some songs to make it more meaningful that would accompany and that related to the book. Some of these songs he wrote and others he didn't. But what's exciting to me is he's going to preview a song this evening with local singer-songwriter Caitlin Lawson. And he did write this song. So he'll be going first. And then Judy will be showing us a sneak preview of her first music video, which is also a collaboration with Mark, and she'll be covering some highlights from her long and prestigious career, and finishing with a short film about pelicans that was included with Pelican Dreams. That's very beautiful. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Judy Irving and Mark Bittner.
So that's, how most people know me, and that's understandable, but it's funny to me because that's like a later chapter in a journey that I started when I was 14. That journey did lead me to the Parrots. It wasn't just a random activity, I think. So I want to go into that a little bit. This is where I grew up. It was a suburb of a suburb. I grew up in Vancouver, Washington, which is a bedroom community of Portland, Oregon. And this was the suburbs of Vancouver. It was right at the edge of the new developments. Farmland is just 2 or 3 blocks away. And here's the backyard. And all of that hillside is developed now. But that's what I grew up in. But I thought when I first moved into it that it was fascinating. I'd been in town, it was an old town, it's an old suburb, so to speak. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm in the modern world now, these new houses and new streets and new cars and new everything. But it was kind of empty to me in the end. What I really liked about where I lived was it was very close to nature. And the only part of my childhood that I ever really enjoyed was our trips camping. And this is Mount St. Helens after it blew. I'd already left by the time it blew, but you could see it on the horizon on clear days. I was only about 30 miles away from it. And my aunt and my grandmother owned a cabin on this, Trapper Creek, which is a runoff from Mount St. Helens. And I just loved going there. It was like you could be in this peaceful place that was endlessly fascinating. So nature, to me, at a very young age, was something that I loved. I'd go out in it alone, even when there were a lot of other kids around. I just wanted to be alone in it. So this is when I was 14, and when I look at that photograph, I see myself just this very hollow, vacant, dreary, unhappy guy. I discovered this photograph recently, and it was scary to me, because I know what happened soon after the photograph was taken. This is what I would call downtown from where I grew up. I lived outside the town, so it was the strip mall was where you went if you wanted to buy a book or buy a record album or whatever. And I would go there, to find stuff. And one day I went. I had just had a bad experience with a girl, and it was very heart-rending and all of that. It was difficult. And on my walk home from the strip mall, I was going down this street, 78th Street, and I was getting more and more emotional, and I didn't know why. It was a little stronger than what I actually felt for her. And then just these tears exploded out of me, and as it happened, I realized I hated where I lived. There was nothing to the place. It was completely empty. People never were on the street. They were inside their houses watching television. And I just swore then that I had to get out of this. And this is just at age 14. And I didn't know that there was a whole literature on suburban angst. I thought I was the only person who had ever felt it. So to me, the antidote was to be an artist. And at first I wanted to be a novelist. But then that was, okay, this is the late 60s, and, singer-songwriters were considered the poets of the time. Okay, well, that's what I want to be then. And I just dropped all the writing ideas, novels and stuff, and started working on music. As soon as I graduated from high school, the first thing I did was I just left home. I had saved up some money, and I went to Europe, and I was hitchhiking around. There was a whole hitchhiker circuit. And this is the island of Ydra in Greece. I started meeting people who were on the same wavelength that I was on. And while this is an art colony. Leonard Cohen used to live there and write. And I wrote a song that you're going to hear later during Judy's presentation. It was a song I wrote when I was 17 called Papa John. So I'm getting into it. I've got these dreams for the future, and how you are when you're that age. You're going to be a big star or whatever, a great artist. And I was working on all of those things in my head. My main goal in going to Europe was this place. I'd read an article about it in Life magazine. This is Matala in southern Crete. And what the article said was that there were a bunch of hippies living in these caves against the wall. I mean, people were just passing through and staying for a while. Joni Mitchell, if you know her song Carrie, wrote about Matala, wrote about this place, the Mermaid Cafe and all of that. So that was my goal. I had set this goal when I was probably 16, and I carried it out. I actually did it, and that was a really, strong feeling that I could make a decision and carry it out. I could live a life that I wanted to live. So it seemed pretty good at the time. There were problems ahead that I didn't see, though. So as soon as I got back to the United States, the counterculture was going full bore. Actually, I think it had kind of peaked by that time, but I was really interested in being part of the counterculture. That's where all the artists and stuff was happening. And I found out about this household, and at that time, the counterculture was sort of divided into two tribes, new leftists and hippies, who were the spiritual, artistic types, and that was me. The rest of these people were essentially new leftists, and I didn't really get along with them really well because I wasn't politically oriented that way. I mean, I had generally the same goals, but I had a different idea of how you got there. The guy who owns the house, who built the house actually, he just found old pieces of house and he cobbled the whole thing together. And it was a very standard middle-class neighborhood, and the whole neighborhood was very upset with this monstrosity. But he's the guy on the far left. He was a plumber, and he was also a bona fide communist, a Marxist. And I always thought it was really funny that my landlord was a communist. Anyway, I had, the house was really unusual. They opened a window and let the ivy grow in from outside, and they pinned it up with twine. So, it was sort of an exotic kitchen. And a lot of people passed through that house. The door didn't even have a lock on it. And people would come and go. You didn't even know who they were. But they had heard about the house with the ivy in the kitchen, and they wanted to see it. And so like I say, I didn't really get along with them, but it was a beautiful time in a certain sense because it was a community. I was meeting new people all the time. I was having stimulating conversations, and I really thought, my life was going somewhere. I got into street singing, not as an end in itself, but I just had this romantic vision of the street. I was following certain writers who said that if you really want to be alive and aware, you got to get down to the streets, man, because you have to have a hard experience where you decimate all your, illusions and your fantasies, and then once you know the truth, you can create. So I wasn't living on the street, but I was getting out in them as often as I could. And my goal was to start on the streets and work my way all the way to the top. So this was in Seattle. There was a certain point where the door opened for me to come down to the Bay Area, which is where I wanted to make it. But I didn't think I was hip enough for San Francisco at that time, so I decided to go to Berkeley first, which I felt like that was dipping your toe in the water and getting used to the heavyweights that Seattle didn't have. But I had this combination going where I was really had a lot of fantasies, but I also had a lot of urges for something really legitimate, but they didn't mesh. And eventually, I had a big, bad accident that I couldn't possibly begin to describe here. It's in the book. I mean, that's one of what the things the book is about, is that story. But to make a long story short, I fell apart, and I could not take care of myself. At that point, my sister swooped into Berkeley. She'd been living out of her car, saw that I was a big mess, and volunteered to take care of me until I put myself back together again. So like a lot of people who lose their way, I started doing a lot of inner work. I was meditating, and I was fasting, and I was struggling to understand what was real. I knew I had been going through a lot of fantasies in my life. I wanted to know what was real. I wanted to have something solid to stand on. So I got into all of that. And Beth was supporting me while I was doing it because I was sincere in what I was doing. But eventually she had to move on, and I couldn't stop it because I was in the middle of this maelstrom of mental activity. I had to carry it through. So I ended up on the street at that point. This, of course, is a really truncated version, but the book covers it all. This was my living room, Grant Avenue in North Beach. It was filled with beats and hippies, and those people were open to the kind of thing that I was doing. So that was my living room. This was my bedroom. I actually slept inside those metal posts because it felt like it made a little wall, even though it was invisible. And I was there for a while, and then I moved to the roof of a building further down the alley, and then I was sleeping in storerooms. I was sleeping in all these places, and that went on for 14 years, and it was not dissolute, except towards the end where I started getting really just tired of the whole thing. It was a real disciplined time for me generally. But the counterculture was breaking up, and I was just trying to hang on to do what I'd always loved and what I believed in. So around the period where things got really bad, I got... well, as I say, I did fall into some dissolution, and I got a gig caretaking a building on the east side of Telegraph Hill, and that's where I started seeing the Parrots. And before that, just before I started feeding them, I'd been craving, a return to nature in some way. I'd remembered my memories of the forests and the rivers of Washington State, the Pacific Northwest. So I wanted a nature experience, and when I first got involved with the Parrots, it was just like I didn't have any friends at the time. So it was like, oh, wow, I learned their personalities. I saw what they did with one another. I knew who the individuals were. I knew how they related. And they were like my friends. And I treated them as friends. I related to them as friends. Like that's Miles in the middle. It's Patrick at the lower left. I knew all those birds. And it wasn't something that I did... It wasn't calculated in any way. I didn't even mean to do it. I just got into it. And I realized later that I felt like I was meant to do it because, one, it answered two needs. It answered two needs that I had. One was for friendships. I didn't have any people that I really liked. So these were my friends. But I always had questions about consciousness, questions about the mind. How does the mind work? And this looks like a studio photograph. It's just the background's out of focus. But this is Sophie, and you look in their eyes and you see they have intelligence, and they're playful, and they're jealous, and they're angry, and they make decisions, and they try to figure things out. So I'd always thought of the mind, consciousness, in terms of what human beings do. But I realized through my experience with the parrots that you have to include the animals in that too. And once I did that, then my understanding opened up tremendously. And there was a lot of things that I didn't used to understand that I understand now because of them. So they'll always be my friends. Well, out of that came a book, and that too was not really calculated. There was a variety of reasons that book happened, and the movie, and it gave me a new direction. It's sort of like the door opened for me. So I am grateful to those birds. And I don't feed them anymore. They were always wild, but now they're just off doing their thing. I see them all the time because I still live in the area. If you've seen the film, it looks like I left, but I came back shortly afterward. We had all of these endings, and the film had to end somewhere. So I do have a few copies if anybody is interested in reading this. Most people know about the film. Most people don't know about the book, so there it is. All right. Now, so I've been writing about that journey I was telling you about before I met the parrots. And one of the strange things is that it sort of brought me back to music. I had quit playing. And as I'm writing this book, I'm writing about music all the time, but you can't really write about music. It's impossible to describe music in words. So I had this friend who has a studio, and I said, well, could we record a few songs? And first it was just going to be me and guitar, like I was on the street. But you have all these tracks available to you. Can we add a harmonica on this song? Sure, whatever you want. So it's gotten more and more elaborate. And it's called, the album, it's going to be about 12 or 13 songs. I'm calling it Street Songs. They're all songs that relate to the book. Some of them I wrote, as she said. And I had this one song that really talks about what my book relates events that are in the book. But it didn't have a title, and I suddenly realized, oh, it's Street Song. So this is Street Song, and I gotta say, okay. The book, back to the book for a second. When I wrote this book, I didn't want it to be a memory for people my age. Oh yeah, I remember the 60s and the 70s. To me, it wasn't worth it unless it was also understandable to younger people. And I put out a call. I said, does anybody know somebody who would make a good reader? I wanted somebody 18 to 20. And Donna here came up with a suggestion, and Caitlin agreed to read. And when I was asking her, about her, what does she do? She says, well, I sing, and I play synthesizer. And I said, oh, you sing? Because I've been needing singers for this project I've been doing, recording. So what I did is I did a sneak audition of her. I told her I just wanted to do a demo, and that if she could sing this part. But it was really just to hear if she could handle it, because I didn't want to offer her the thing, and then it didn't work out, and I had to say no. And she nailed it. It was just beautiful. So I'm going to have Caitlin come up now and join me on that song. So this is something I used to do all the time, and I hardly ever do it anymore, so I'm nervous. Okay, so this is Street Song. I wanna know what you've been doing. I've been untrue, but I still feel the same about you. Sleeping in the back of a cantina, tired of drinking brew, eating scraps a dog was supposed to do. I got a letter from my mother. She said,
"Come on home, son, we'll take good care of you."
but I gotta get back to you, my lover, and no one else will. No one else will do. Once upon a time the sidewalks filled with a bunch of hip scarecrows, and some who were there just to catch the show. I played guitar out on the streets in Berkeley till I had to go. Played piano in Hotel Mendocino, Mendocino. It's like we got shot out of a cannon. Every day was another response to a call. People casting stones at the walls of Mammon. But you know we had a great fall. Pulled up lame outside of San Francisco, suffering from the bends. I couldn't make a living, I couldn't make no sense. Money talked and now everyone's listening. I watched my friends disappear into the back of a Mercedes-Benz. I'm wondering how I could have neglected the only path that could take me out from under this gun. The spirit moves you when you least expect it, but you can't see how. Can't see how it's done. Caitlin Lawson. All right. I'm going to pass it on to Judy now.
Okay, well, keeping with the music theme, the first thing I'm going to show you is my first music video, which I just finished 3 days ago. So this is actually a sneak preview. And it's a song that Mark wrote when he was 17. I want to set it up a little bit. You heard about his upbringing in Vancouver. Well, this is a song about, it's a metaphorical piece. It's about the dean of boys at his high school, who he really liked, and who was so nice to the students and so kind to them that the administration had him fired. Okay, so that's the basic story, but then the lyrics are a metaphorical abstraction of that story. You'll hear the lyrics. And then my film is yet another metaphorical abstraction of the lyrics based on what I had at hand that I could film. And so there's some South Enders here in the audience. Can you raise your hand, South End Rowing Club? Oh, just one, two. Okay, great. A lot of it is shot at the South End Rowing Club in San Francisco, where I've been swimming for 32 years in the bay. That's one of the ways to explore wild nature without having to go too far away. So enjoy the song, and then I'll be back with a little backstory after that.
Papa John sitting in the river, making sure that the fish can swim. Such a wise man, such a nice man. Dirty water don't bother him. The sleepy river makes the day so long. Papa John on the muddy banks sat a bunch of cranks, bored with their bridges and their memory notes. They said we'd better bust him. The fish, they seem to trust him. We'll send him off to China in a very slow boat. Tried to croak you with a toad called Thrasher. All he did was spread warts around. He's so green, ornery and mean. Oh yeah, that toad tried to put you down. And now I hear that you've been gone, Papa John. They made you leave the river. The reasons make me shiver. They did their dirty work from dusk until dawn. And now the fish are friendless, the situation's endless. I wish the best for you, Papa John.
Okay, now for a little bit of backstory. I was invited to do a quick 7-minute review of my career at my 50th college reunion a few months ago. And so I've edited it a little bit for you folks, but it's going to be very quick. It'll be about 7 minutes for my entire career since college, okay? Basically, my life may seem unconventional. I've been a filmmaker for 45 years, didn't get married till I was 60 to this guy. It was our first marriage for either one of us. Have no kids, but it all seems perfectly natural to me. Basically, after a conventional East Coast upbringing, I hitchhiked across the country to the Queen Charlotte Islands in Canada, and there basically became a hippie and started to worry my mother quite a bit. And the thing that really had her concerned was that I had this boyfriend and we decided to go off the grid. So we built this little house on a little hut on a raft and made those cedar shakes ourselves. This was in a small cove near Queen Charlotte City. Now the island is called Haida Gwaii. But because we were floating in the cove, we didn't have to pay rent, and we just dug clams and did odd jobs here and there. And that was when she started writing me letters. After all the money we spent sending you to Connecticut College, and you go back to the woods, what are you doing? Anyway, it was what a lot of people were doing then. But Florence, my mom, really didn't have to worry that much because feminism and environmentalism were rising in the culture and at the time, and I kind of glommed onto that, and I was really affected by it. And I decided I wanted to save the world with documentary films. So I went to Stanford and got my master's in film, ended up in Alaska, out in the wilds, making a film about proposed national refuges and parks. This was before the Alaska Lands Act and before the pipeline was built. We shot it in 1974. So there we are with our the Eclair NPR, the Bolex, which you could wind up, you didn't need a battery, and all this other heavy film equipment, and made several films up there, actually, and we got to go all over the place. The Great Kobuk Sand Dunes, the Arctic Slope, the Wrangell Mountains, and all of those places eventually became national parks and refuges. So it was not because of the film, but it was a film for the Sierra Club, and it helped, and it was really, really satisfying. One of the most important experiences for me, though, was up there. We were sitting by a river on the Arctic slope. It was the Saddle-a-Rochit River, and we each did several-hour shifts waiting for the caribou to come. We were trying to film the caribou crossing the river. And of course, you could never tell what the caribou were going to do. You could barely even tell where they were going to show up or when. But I was doing my stint down by the river. I was there for many hours, probably 6 hours. And I started hearing music in the river and voices in the river. It was pristine, it was pure, it was quiet, but I heard these voices and the music, and I just felt like I'd been let into some kind of timeless realm. I haven't had that many experiences like that, but I'll never forget it. And you probably have had something happen like that too, out in the wild. And it was all because of that pristine water. Well, back in California, the water wasn't so pristine. And in fact, the Diablo Canyon nuclear power plant, which was under construction at the time, if it got built, it was going to make the water so hot that it would kill the fish and it would be radioactive. So that Diablo was close to where I lived in San Francisco, and meanwhile, I had a job that took me to Denver, Colorado. I was doing a film about Chicanos in politics, but meanwhile, we're drinking the water in Denver and hanging out in Denver, and I read an article in a magazine while we were there that the Rocky Flats plutonium plant had contaminated the water supply. So these two things combined to encourage me to make my first feature documentary, which was called Dark Circle, about the links between nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And those two locations became the two major US locations. We also went to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and we filmed interviews with survivors. So that was, in a way, trying to save the world, but it was very upsetting, and it was kind of an obsession that I had for 10 years, the nuclear issue. It was finished in early '83, but recently remastered and just re-released. So it's online. I can give you folks the link and so forth later if you're interested in seeing it. We're literally giving it away to try to pry Trump's finger off the nuclear trigger. So after the 10-year obsession with Armageddon, I needed to point my camera at something sweet and harmless. And this is the salt marsh harvest mouse, filmed up in the San Pablo Baylands. It's an endangered mouse and very hard to film. This little critter, I had seconds to film this little critter because he was being weighed and measured and so forth by the biologists that I was with, and then they were going to let him go. So he did this really cute little peeking through the pickleweed, and I was able to get that picture. And that's the one that was on the cover of Bay Nature a little while ago. And so this led to 5 films about the San Francisco Bay and Delta and Greenbelt that I made with my partner over a 10-year period from about 89 to 99, and no, 87 to 97. And only one of those films has a mouse in it, but all of them have birds. And one day, somebody said, "Hey, you should make a movie about that guy who feeds the parrots." And 4.5, 5 years later, The Wild Parrots of Telegraph Hill came out, and it was the easiest, most fun, and most popular film I've ever made. It was my second feature documentary. It was released to theaters in 2005 and ended up playing in 500 theaters across the country and playing for like a year around here and in Santa Fe and so forth. So it was just a thrill. I knew I liked it, but I didn't know that many other people would like it. And it just was really fun to finally, after having spent, let's say by then, 3 decades in the trenches, to have something that was really popular. It was really a kick. And it also changed my life. I ended a 27-year relationship and got married to the Parrot Man. But my all-time favorite bird, though, and has been since I was a kid, is the pelican. And in 2014, my third feature documentary came out called Pelican Dreams. Again, it was a 4.5, 5-year project where I traveled all the way up and down the coast, the west coast from Baja all the way up to the Columbia River to film the migration of the pelicans. But also I really wanted to get to know one. I kind of felt an affinity with pelicans ever since I was a little kid, because they're kind of awkward on land, and I was kind of a tall, awkward, gawky kid. They have long faces. I have a long face, all that kind of stuff. And this is Moro, the pelican I got to know best. Moro, I've often thought about, what is Moro thinking? And how does he stay so calm and contemplative all the time? Pelicans are not aggressive. They seem to be in a special, almost timeless space. And I started wondering, how does he perceive time? Ended up writing an essay called Species of Time about how various plants and animals and humans perceive time. But I've been thinking about time a lot. Ever since I spent my mom, the last 10 days of my mom's life with her, just before she died at age 100, almost 101. And we talked about time and lifespan and death, and I realized, I saw, speaking with her toward the end, that she really wasn't afraid of death. She just wanted to make sure that I was happy with my lifespan and what I had done with my life. She was happy and contented with hers, and she wanted that for me too. Practical as always, this is how she talked about death. She said, well, millions of people have died before me, I'm sure I can do it too. So as my own lifespan ahead gets shorter, time seems to speed up, but it stops when I'm in my element, filming landscapes and animals and plants. So I'll keep on making movies, grateful to the plants and animals I'm filming to be able to slow down to their pace. Thanks. And now, speaking of slowing down to their pace, the last little mini movie that you'll see is a film called Flying Made Easy, and it's an extra on the Pelican Dreams DVD. And you'll see that I really did have to slow down and get in sync with the pelican's pace, particularly with certain soaring shots. So, enjoy. I've always wondered why birds fly in a V, and why they sometimes fly so close to the water. I figured a pilot would know, so I asked Andy White, a great helicopter pilot I've worked with, to explain what's going on aerodynamically.
Actually, the bird in the lead of the V is doing all the work. He's braking the air in front of the entire group, which the birds that trail on take advantage of because they don't have to work as hard. It's a form of drafting. In addition, the lead bird, when he flaps upward, creates a slight updraft in wind. The birds that follow on don't have to work as hard to stay aloft. The cormorants that are flying low to the water here are using an aerodynamic feature that we pilots refer to as ground effect, which basically is the air is compressed between the ground and the wing to create higher pressure to make the wing more efficient, where you are so close to the surface that you are basically flying on a cushion of air. Watch this little cormorant in the center of the frame here. He gets distracted, his right wing goes down, touches the top of the wave, and he tumbles in. Let's watch it again in slow motion. Cormorants, because of their body weight and their smaller wings, have to work harder, whereas the pelicans have a greater wingspan. They're just the masters. They have eons and eons of it inbred with them on how to master the small eddies, the thermals, the ground effect, the drafting. They're just magnificent.
That was, that's what I meant when I said that I had to get myself in sync with the birds, so that, because I'm standing there on the beach with a tripod, and the camera's on the tripod, and I have it zoomed in pretty tight on the birds, and then I try to sort of bend my body around so that I can start way over here, and then very smoothly, as smooth as I can, pan with them for as far as I can. And sometimes I'll trip over the tripod, or, bobble it, or I think you saw a couple bobbles in there, but part of it was very smooth. And it's just a wonderful feeling when you can get in sync with an animal like that. It's not that easy, especially since particularly that beach, which is a beach just north of Morro Bay. It's called Dog Beach because they let the dogs run around. But it's just this beautiful long beach, and they go forever. They just don't even have to flap, Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much. Thank you.